I emerged from the taxi, clad in my uniform, and gripping a duffel bag, my heart weighed down by a quarter century of unspoken words. As I approached the porch, I noticed my sister Claire, already on the phone urgently calling the authorities. The air of late September wrapped around me cool and heavy, infused with the scent of damp leaves. I lingered at the threshold of the wrought iron gate that barred entry to the place I had once cherished as home. A security camera hummed softly overhead, adjusting its angle almost as if it were acknowledging my presence. I stood in anticipation, yearning for the reassuring click of the lock that would signal my arrival was finally acknowledged. No one arrived. The gate remained stubbornly closed. I activated the intercom. A sudden buzz pierced the air, followed by an unsettling stillness. I made another attempt. "Claire!" My voice trembled, worn by the passage of time. "It's just me." The front door creaked open, revealing the world beyond. Claire stepped out in a perfectly fitted blazer and sharp slacks, embodying the essence of the estate's vigilant guardian. She paused at the top of the stairs, her phone pressed to her ear, anticipation swirling in the air around her. "I'm reaching out to the authorities," she remarked, her gaze sharpening as though I were an unfamiliar face. "It seems there's an individual attempting to gain access to the premises. Asserts a connection of kinship." The sudden jolt stole the breath right out of my chest. "Claire, what are you up to?" "This place no longer belongs to you," she retorted sharply. "It's been decades since you left Naomi. Don't come here looking like that and expecting anything." I clutched the duffel bag more firmly. "I've just been released. I really imagined I would see my mom, perhaps my dad too." She let out a dismissive laugh. "You ought to have considered them before vanishing for a quarter of a century. We have moved forward. You have not been included in the will. You aren't even listed on the deed." The words struck deeper than any battle account I had ever documented. "This house has been my home since childhood." I spoke in a hushed tone. The sycamore tree I indicated still brushed against the attic window. I injured my arm while attempting to climb it. I stained the carpet you likely swapped out. Claire's jaw tightened in response. "You consistently turn the focus onto yourself. Do you really believe that wearing a uniform grants you the privilege to arrive and anticipate a grand reception?" The police cruiser crept onto the street, its blue lights flickering in the dim light. The siren silent, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. My stomach churned. Two officers emerged, one seasoned and the other just fresh from the academy. The older one paused for a moment when he caught sight of me. "Naomi Hale," he inquired. "Madam, you are—" "I've just stepped out. Approved by the highest standards. Lieutenant Colonel of Cyber Command." I took a deep breath. This is the home where my parents reside. The young officer cast a sidelong look at Claire, who stood with her arms folded, a triumphant air about her. "This estate is owned by Claire Bennett and Richard Hale. There is no official documentation indicating that Naomi Hale possesses ownership or residency rights." My mouth opened closed. "Wait, Richard Hale, my father." I blinked hard. "He's still here." Claire's face remained carved from stone. "He moved in after selling the house we grew up in. This was Grandpa's. I renovated it. Legally." "I don't care about legal," I whispered. "I care that it was home." The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, unless you have identification proving this is your residence, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." My hands trembled as I fumbled for my discharge papers, but even I knew they didn't matter here. I took a step back, then another, until my boots met the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't cry when they took my medals. I didn't cry when I coded in a hospital tent in Bahrain, but I cried now because the place that shaped me refused to recognize me. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it with numb fingers. A message from Mom. No name, just, "You should return to base. There's nothing here for you." I let the phone drop. Through the fog of my tears, I looked up past the window where a figure sat in the living room. My father. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even glance at me. I looked through the window, a silhouette of my father seated inside, unmoving, refusing to look at me even once. I slept in my car that night, staring at the dark outline of the home that should have been mine. By morning, a for sale sign was already posted on the lawn. I didn't sleep much. My eyes refused to close. Every creak of the wind, every flicker of the porch light, every memory that clung to the silhouette of that house. It kept me locked in place, heart pounding with a rhythm I hadn't felt since my early deployments. That was supposed to be my safe place, my inheritance, my anchor. Now it was a battleground. I pulled into a small cafe the next morning, bleary-eyed and bone-tired. Ruth Klein was already there, pressed slacks, dark blazer, a sharp contrast to my faded uniform and the exhaustion etched into my face. We hadn't seen each other since undergrad, but she looked at me like no time had passed. That alone almost made me cry. "I saw the listing this morning," she said without greeting, flipping her tablet toward me. There it was, my home listed under Raven Holdings, LLC. I stared at the screen. Raven Holdings. She nodded grimly. And here's the kicker. 3 months ago, there was a property transfer recorded. Here. She passed over a printout. My name was on the seller line. Except, that wasn't my signature. "That's forged," I said flatly, a cold pressure building behind my eyes. "I've never signed anything related to selling that house." I figured. Ruth pulled up another document, this one from a local notary, witnessed and stamped by a guy who was under review last year for falsifying DMV affidavits. "I'll subpoena him." I shook my head in disbelief. So they sold their house. And now they're laundering through mine. Her brows arched. What? I took a breath. 3 months ago, they moved out of their house, said it was time for a fresh start. They showed up here. Claire said it made more sense to consolidate family assets. My parents' mom especially made a big deal about how sentimental the old house was, but I didn't think they meant this house. Ruth nodded slowly. They probably used Raven Holdings as a buffer to avoid legal exposure. Whoever's behind that company, I bet your sister's husband is involved. My stomach turned. Brian Ruth looked grim. He works in international logistics, doesn't he? Yes. And they're storing supplies in the basement. I blinked. What? She pointed to a note in her file. City utilities show a spike in energy consumption at the property, like something's being refrigerated, but no permit for renovation or commercial usage has been filed. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. An email from my mother. I didn't want to read it, but I did. "Naomi, this is not betrayal. It's practicality. You never lived here. We did. And you're never around. Love, Mom." It hit harder than I expected, like she was justifying theft with maternal indifference. "I need access to that house," I murmured. "Not just to take it back. I want to know what's inside." Ruth hesitated. "That could be dangerous, Naomi. If they're using the house for something illegal, I'm not walking away." She nodded once. "Then we'll start with the forensic document analyst. I'll file for an injunction to freeze the title. And Naomi, what you'll need to be careful. People who forge deeds and commit fraud aren't afraid to cross legal lines." The rest of the day passed in tense calls and quiet meetings. I returned to my car late that evening, unsure whether I was more angry or numb. I parked down the block, determined to stay close to watch. The air was still warm, sticky, like Virginia hadn't accepted fall yet. I noticed the man standing across the street just after 10:45. He didn't look at me, but he lingered near the corner lamppost. When he left, I thought nothing of it until I saw the slip of paper wedged under my windshield wiper. It wasn't folded, just pressed flat like a warning or a test. "If you're the real Naomi, meet me at Alley 7, 11 p.m. Come alone." I stared down the block at the winding path that led behind the old bakery. I had 10 minutes. I didn't hesitate. Cliffhanger, one neighbor, handed me a folded scrap of paper. "If you're the real Naomi, meet me at Alley Sapron to 7, 11 p.m. They said you were mentally unstable after combat," the neighbor whispered. "But I've seen the way your sister's husband brings men here at night." The man's voice was low, sharp with urgency. His name was Ethan, mid-40s, weathered face, former Marine turned mechanic. We stood in the shadow of an old street lamp at the edge of the alley behind the property. A chain-link fence separated us from the warehouse, turned storage shed behind what was once my grandfather's home. "They say you're dangerous, Naomi," he muttered. "But if you ask me, dangerous is what's going on in that building." My fingers curled around the edge of my jacket, where the small recording device sat in the inner pocket. I scanned the alley. No security cameras. No eyes, but too quiet. What do you mean? I asked. I've seen men unloading crates from black vans. License plates vanish before they pull up. They don't stay long. Your sister's husband, he's there every week, always with gloves on, never a word to the neighbors. I remember the last thing Brian ever said to me the day of my grandfather's funeral. You should stick to places with guns, Lieutenant. This isn't your terrain anymore. That smug tone, the contempt. Maybe he was right, but I knew how to watch, how to wait. That night, I returned to the alley alone, dressed in black camera, clipped to my collar recorder live. I crouched behind the half-burnt fence near the back lot. Midnight came with the low rumble of engines. 2 black trucks rolled in without headlights. I held my breath. 4 men stepped out too. I didn't recognize one, clearly armed. The other wore a cap pulled low and carried a clipboard. Then came Brian. His gait was confident, relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday night. He didn't speak much, just pointed toward the rear door of the house. The group moved with practiced ease. Boxes, unloaded hands, gloved everything efficient. Ruth was right. This wasn't just squatting, this was organized. Then something unexpected. Brian stepped inside the old warehouse. I crept closer, careful not to trigger the loose gravel underfoot. I positioned the small audio recorder near a cracked vent, its mic angled toward the loading area. From inside, voices filtered through, too muffled for clarity, but then one cut through sharper than the rest. If that officer girl finds out, sever the tie. No warning. I froze. The voice was familiar, gravelly, deliberate. My father. My throat tightened. I replayed it in my head just to be sure. That deep Virginia accent, that phrasing. I hadn't heard him speak directly to me in years, and now I heard him planning my erasure. I withdrew slowly, slipping behind the fence, hands shaking. I clutched the recording device like it might burn through my palm. Back in my car, I played the audio again, scrubbed it carefully, listening for every syllable. The voices were vague except his, that one line. It played over and over in my head. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I circled the block again and returned to the alley. But when I reached the vent, my recorder was gone. Someone had been there. Someone new. Panic flooded my gut, thick and metallic. My cover was slipping. I needed to move fast before the window slammed shut. I drove to a nearby diner to regroup, heart hammering. I wasn't even halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message read, "You're playing with fire. I have your military psych report. Want to see what it says about you, cliffhanger?" A message popped up on my phone. "You're playing with fire. I have your military psych report." My father met me in a parking lot. He didn't hug me. He didn't even look me in the eye. He said, "You've changed." And not for the better. The wind picked up before he did. He stood next to his navy blue sedan crisp jacket, zipped all the way to the collar, hat pulled low as if shielding himself from recognition. But it wasn't the rain he feared. It was me. I recognized the distance in his eyes, the stiffness in his posture. He'd practiced this meeting, prepared for it like a business transaction. Cold, clean, efficient. I stopped 2 steps away. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't flinch. "You came back different." I swallowed. "I served this country for 25 years. And in those 25 years, you became someone I don't recognize." The sentence hit like a rifle shot. I had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways, him saying he was proud, even quietly acknowledging the work I'd done. I had never imagined indifference. "I want the truth about the house," I said, voice low but sharp. "You knew what Grandpa left me. You witnessed the signing." He shifted his weight. "That document was outdated. Circumstances changed. Enough to forge my name, enough to hide it under a shell company." I stepped closer. "I have audio." That got him. His jaw tensed, eyes narrowing, but still he wouldn't look directly at me. "I heard your voice. You said if I found out you'd cut the tie." He finally turned toward me, then his eyes colder than I remembered. "I meant what I said. We've tried to protect the family name. Your return jeopardizes everything we've built. Your sister is part of a respected enterprise. You live in a car because you sold my home." He didn't answer, just glanced toward the black SUV parked across the lot. "I'm not ashamed of what I've done," I said. "But you are. Of me. That's what this is really about." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs like brushing off dirt. "You're not one of us anymore." The words didn't echo. They landed and stayed. He turned, walked to the SUV, and the driver stepped out to open the door. I recognized the man immediately, the same one who'd helped unload boxes at the warehouse. Bald head, silver watch, always silent. They drove off without another word. I stood alone in the rain. It started as a drizzle, then turned heavier, soaking through my sleeves, my collar, my soul. There was no reconciliation waiting in this story, just truth, and that was colder than anything I'd faced in uniform. I walked back to my car, chest tight, throat burning, every breath a silent argument I couldn't win. I didn't cry, but I did find an envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper. It wasn't official, just a plain manila sleeve sealed with tape. I got in, turned on the cabin light, and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photocopy of my grandfather's original will, my name. The property address, all unaltered. The signature dates matched the copy I had stored in an encrypted archive from years ago. No transfer clause, no sale condition. It was airtight. A handwritten note was stapled to the top. "I notarized this document that day. I know they falsified it later." I stared at it, heart pounding. Proof. The first crack in their narrative. I scanned it again, then snapped a picture and texted it to Ruth with a single line. "This changes everything." Cliffhanger. A handwritten note was stapled to the top. "I notarized this document that day. I know they falsified it later." The deed was forged. But Brian's name showed up in an old FBI case, sealed until now. I sat in the corner of my temporary rental bare mattress, one chair, no curtains, lit only by the blue light of my laptop. Outside, the night wind rattled loose siding. Inside, my stomach churned as I stared at the report Isaac just sent over. I had reached out hours earlier, forwarding the original deed and the scanned will along with the corporate trail Ruth had begun unearthing. He'd responded almost instantly. "I remember Raven Holdings," he wrote. "We flagged them as a front company during a 2012 counter-intel probe laundering false contracting dark money. But we were told to stand down. Case was sealed. Now the name Brian Keene was staring back at me, listed under consultant logistics in the appendix of that same file. I froze. Claire had always insisted Brian saved the family from collapse. He rebuilt Dad's business. Without him, we'd have lost everything. No wonder she protected him so fiercely. But rebuild with what dirty money? I opened the next PDF from Ruth transaction records tied to the shell companies leasing the warehouse. She traced them to 3 entities, each registered in Nevada under different names. But the money flowed to one destination, Claire's private account. Over $500,000 transferred in the past 18 months. I clenched my jaw and pulled up the leasing contract, found the name of the property manager. I didn't need to read past the first line. My father's signature, bold and slanted, was right there. Land use supervisor. He had signed off on it. So they were all in it. All 3 of them. I ran a background index on Raven Holdings through the private intel portal Isaac still had access to. The tags were damning: classified contractor cover, suspected financial funnel, domestic asset misappropriation. Isaac pinged again. "You sure you're ready for this? If you move, they'll hit back." I replied without hesitation. "I'm not backing off. I'm not just fighting for a house. I'm fighting to expose what they've done and who they're still hurting." I called Ruth. She picked up immediately. "I have the contractor names, the bank routing, the signed lease. Everything links. And the forgery matches. My signature was copied from a tax return in 2017, notarized by a woman who hasn't been licensed since 2020. I already verified." Ruth was silent a moment. Then we file. Fraud, criminal, conspiracy, real estate, title tampering, possibly federal racketeering if the Raven Holdings connection holds. It holds. For the first time since I'd returned, I felt grounded, not angry, not broken, focused. "They erased me," I said, "but now I've found them. On paper. In crime files. In signatures they forgot to hide." My inbox chimed. A leak. Subject urgent. She's investigating. It was an internal email sent between 2 Raven Holdings addresses. Someone had forwarded it anonymously. She started connecting the dots. Clean house before the 16th. Locked down the Claire accounts. The Hale girls persistent. I read it twice. They knew. They were already trying to erase the trail again. Cliffhanger. An internal email had leaked. She started connecting the dots. Clean house before the 16th. I stood at the gate again, this time in uniform decorated with honors, but beside me was someone more powerful than Metals, my lawyer. Ruth adjusted the strap of her leather case as we waited at the counter inside Fairfax Town Hall. Sunlight poured through the high windows, but the tension between us and the property office clerk was thick as cement. The clerk tapped her keyboard, eyes darting across the screen. "This deed is active," she said almost too casually. Ruth didn't flinch. "That's precisely why we're here. We're filing a petition for immediate injunction on all transfers based on compelling evidence of forgery and fraud." I slid forward the folder Ruth had prepared, detailed analysis of the signature inconsistencies, the timeline of the false notary, and the suspicious account trails. At the top of the stack sat the verified original deed from my grandfather's will. The woman's eyes widened. She looked at Ruth, then at me. "Lieutenant Colonel Hale," I said softly, retired. "I grew up in that house." By noon, we had a stamped confirmation. The land office had enacted a temporary hold on all transactions related to the property pending further investigation. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. A line in the sand. The drive to the house felt surreal. This time we didn't park across the street or lurk in shadows. We pulled straight into the driveway. Claire's Lexus was already there. Brian's truck, too. Ruth adjusted her jacket, pulled out the official envelope with the injunction, and handed it to me. "Let's give it to her together." I rang the bell. Claire answered, her lips already curled into that polished, performative smile until she saw my uniform. Then she saw Ruth. The color drained from her face. "We're here to serve you with a court injunction," Ruth said crisply, handing over the envelope. "Effective immediately. Any transfer, lease, or modification of the property is suspended. You've been notified." Claire's hands trembled as she took the papers. "What is this, some kind of joke?" she hissed. Brian appeared behind her, slow and deliberate. "You really want to go this route, Naomi," he said, voice like gravel soaked in oil. "You don't know who you're fighting." I met his gaze. Calm, controlled. "I used to work internal investigations at the Pentagon," I said. "I've seen men like you watch them bluff, threaten, then fold." His eyes narrowed. For a flicker, just a breath. I saw it, fear. Not of me, maybe, but of something unraveling. Claire sputtered. "You can't do this. You're not even the rightful owner." Ruth cut in. "That's what we intend to prove in court." Brian stepped forward. "This is harassment. You're harassing my family." Ruth gave him a hard look. "And fraud is a felony." We turned and left. The slam of the door behind us was louder than I expected, like a final act in a play that had gone on too long. In the car, Ruth glanced over at me. "They'll hit back, Naomi. You ready, Cliffhanger?" Ruth looked at me. "They will strike back." "Are you ready?" What they didn't know, I had access to tools they couldn't imagine, digital forensics, chain of custody metadata, and a few friends who owed me favors. The soft hum of my laptop filled the silent apartment as I leaned over a second monitor, eyes tracing digital breadcrumbs left behind by people who thought they were smarter than the system. The glow of the screen lit the stacks of documents on my kitchen counter, overlapping in an organized chaos only I could decipher. It was nearing midnight. I hadn't slept properly in days, but sleep didn't matter. Not when I was this close. I clicked into the secure Zoom room. Isaac appeared first, tired eyes, Marine Corps cap still on despite the hour. Then Kayla popped in. She'd always preferred anonymity, a blurred background, and her voice modulated just enough to avoid AI tracing. "I got your packet," Kayla said without preamble. "Encrypted well, but let's see what the liars left behind." I uploaded a zip file of PDF screenshots and one particularly shady wire transfer receipt. Kayla whistled. "Someone's been busy laundering money." "Follow the IP," I said. "That's all I need." She started parsing headers, running scripts, fingers tapping like a symphony of exposure. Meanwhile, Isaac leaned closer to the camera. "I ran that company name you sent, Mara Tech Solutions." You're not gonna like this. He uploaded a redacted report from a Defense Department internal archive. Back in 2016, Maratech bid on a supply contract camo gear and radio parts. They submitted forged compliance reports. Case got sealed when someone upstairs pulled strings. Let me guess. I said flatly, no conviction, no penalty. Correct. But guess whose name shows up on the board of directors, Brian A. Whitmore? I stared at the name. All this time, Claire said he was the one who kept the family stable. She never said how. Kayla interrupted. I isolated a digital signature from that financial transfer you sent. The VPN they used isn't clean. Most amateurs assume they're safe, but there's a DNS leak. That IP traces back to a residential modem Fairfax area, registered to Claire Hale. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. So they're funneling money from the house. Exactly. And get this, Kayla added. One of the purchase orders routed through Maratech's system matches a lot number tied to a surveillance drone batch we flagged years ago during your deployment. You were still in the Gulf then, right? My mind flashed back. That case never resolved. Half the gear vanished after audit. Someone covered it. Now it felt like the ghosts of my past were reaching through the timeline, converging right here, right now. I want a chain of evidence, I said. Every login, every IP, every transaction they touched. This isn't just fraud. It's military-grade misappropriation. Isaac nodded. I'll pull DoD procurement cross-references. This could trigger federal review if it hits the right ears. Kayla's screen flickered. Her face sharpened with tension. Naomi, she said carefully, your inbox was accessed at 8:42 p.m. from an unfamiliar device. I froze. Are you saying I've been hacked? I'm saying someone's trying to cover their tracks? And you just lit up their radar? Cliffhanger. Kayla warned me. They're scanning your location again. Someone breached your email tonight. The letter came in a plain envelope, a cease and desist, but I had already mailed my report to the Office of the Inspector General. It was thin, too thin to contain the weight of the guilt they carried, but it screamed desperation. The envelope sat on my kitchen table next to a steaming mug of black coffee, its neatly typed return address, sterile and smug. Raven Holdings Legal Affairs. I didn't even bother opening it. Instead, I turned back to the envelope I had dropped off yesterday morning. Priority mail certified, signed upon delivery. Inside were copies of bank transfers, falsified deeds, metadata chains, audio transcripts, and a sworn affidavit detailing how my identity had been used to secure access to restricted contracts. Each page was numbered, watermarked, and bound together by the one thing none of them had counted on a soldier who knew how to build a case from the ground up. The Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Defense didn't move quickly, but when it moved, it thundered. Later that evening, I received the automated reply. Your report has been received and assigned a preliminary review officer. Follow-up will be communicated via a secure channel. I read the line 3 times, letting it settle into the marrow of my bones. No longer whispers and shadows, no longer secrets between family members. This was now federal. Ruth called as I finished scanning the reply. They'll want a full comparison of Claire's known income versus incoming wires. Can you get that from Kayla? I already asked her, I said. She's pulling last year's IRS statements and cross-referencing them with flag transfers from shell companies. We'll need a subpoena eventually. Let me worry about that, Ruth replied. Just make sure nothing happens to you in the meantime. I smiled grimly. They'd have to try harder than an envelope. But elsewhere, someone was unraveling. I didn't hear it firsthand, but I later found out from Ruth, who heard it from a courthouse clerk who had lunch with someone at the zoning office. Claire had lost it. Apparently, she found out about the federal submission within hours. Whether it was the bank's compliance alert or a panicked call from Brian, she knew I'd gone over their heads, and she didn't take it well. By noon, Claire had shown up at Ruth's office unannounced, uninvited, and unhinged. You think this is going to help her? She'd hissed. She's going to drag us all down, including her own father. Ruth remained calm, professional. She handed her a copy of the cease and desist letter I had received and said quietly, You might want to advise your counsel that intimidation of a federal whistleblower is a felony. Claire stormed out, but not before throwing one final threat over her shoulder. This isn't over. No, I thought sitting in my apartment watching the rain beat against the window. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, Ruth came over with 2 folders, bank summaries from Claire and Brian. The figures were staggering. Claire's declared salary as a nonprofit coordinator didn't come close to matching the deposits, and Brian. There were 3 transfers from a shell account linked to Meritech Solutions, all deposited the same week the forged deed was processed. I stared at the numbers, shaking my head. They moved fast, I said. They had a timeline. This wasn't desperation. It was coordinated. They underestimated you, Ruth said. I looked at her, calm but resolute. They always have. The phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it on speaker. It was Claire, her voice shaky, uneven. Naomi, please. Let's meet. Just talk. This doesn't have to go further. We're still family. I ended the message before it finished. I'm not here to talk, I told Ruth. I'm here to shut them down. Hey, cliffhanger, Claire then whispered to our mother. If Naomi blows this open, he'll be the first to go to prison. Claire deleted me from the family tree. I added her name to a federal inquiry. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the 7th floor of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arlington. I stood beside Ruth, my reflection barely recognizable in the brushed metal doors. Not because of my clothes, I was still in a muted blazer and slacks, but because of what I was carrying inside. For once, it wasn't a uniform or a badge. It was knowledge leverage evidence. We were led to a glass-walled conference room by a stone-faced paralegal. Inside, the federal prosecutor was already waiting, Matthew Cruz, assistant U.S. attorney for Northern Virginia. His handshake was firm, but not performative. His eyes didn't flinch when Ruth set down the bulging folder of documents. Ms. Hale, he began, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the material submitted to the Office of the Inspector General. We believe a formal criminal inquiry is warranted. Hearing it aloud gave the whole thing new weight. The forged deeds, the bank transfers, the surveillance footage, and most damning of all, the fraudulent contracts tied to Raven Holdings and Meritech, both traced back to Claire and Brian. I spoke carefully, controlling my breathing like I had in hundreds of interrogations before. They used my discharge credentials to gain access to federal bidding processes. They used my grandfather's house as a discreet waypoint. They never imagined someone would come back to check. Ruth added, we also have preliminary confirmation that Mr. Hale and Naomi's father served as a proxy on property transfers to mask conflict of interest. That may qualify as conspiracy to defraud. Cruz opened a leather binder. Based on what we've received, we're issuing federal subpoenas for Brian Whitmore, Claire Hale, and William Hale. They will be compelled to testify in a closed preliminary hearing 2 weeks from today. I leaned forward. I want to be anonymous until then. No public disclosures, no leaks to media or local authorities. They've already tried to intimidate me. We'll flag your testimony under protective status, Cruz said, but be advised, once formal charges are filed, anonymity isn't guaranteed. That's fine, I said. By then, I want to be the one speaking out loud. Outside the window, I could see the Potomac placid and gray, the calm before the current shifted. That afternoon, I waited with Ruth in the lobby of Claire's nonprofit foundation. The Trotto was to be delivered in person. She didn't know we were watching from across the atrium. Claire walked in brisk heels and a too bright smile for the receptionist. It took less than a minute. A U.S. Marshal stepped forward, handed her the envelope, and spoke the words we'd waited weeks to hear. You are being summoned under federal subpoena for alleged participation in conspiracy and fraud. The receptionist gasped. Phones froze in mid-scroll. Claire's smile shattered. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. She turned eyes scanning the lobby, and for a moment I thought she saw me. But she didn't. I was behind mirrored glass, watching the empire she built on silence begin to crumble. Later that night, Ruth and I stepped out of the federal building after finalizing the paperwork. The air smelled like the first hint of spring-wet concrete pollen tension. I've rarely seen a case turn this fast, Ruth murmured. They know they're exposed. Good, I said. They should be afraid. As we reached the parking garage, I slowed. A black sedan sat idling across the street. Windows tinted, engine running, no license plate visible from this angle. Just long enough to be watching. Just long enough to make sure I noticed. Cliffhanger. Naomi stepped out of the courthouse. Someone was watching from a black car across the street. The walls they stole from me are now silent witnesses in court. And the woman they called unstable, she's the one testifying. The courtroom was two cold white lights overhead, pale walls, steel benches that hummed when I shifted. I stood behind the witness table, right hand raised the oath catching in my throat like sandpaper. I didn't shake, but I remembered. The day my grandfather handed me the keys to the house. The day I came home to find my name erased. The night I heard my father's voice masked in shadows plotting behind my back. Now I stood here not as the daughter who had been disowned, but as a decorated officer, a cybersecurity analyst with clearance history, and most importantly a plaintiff backed by federal prosecution. The prosecutor began, "Ms. Hale, please describe what was done to your property." I met his eyes, then shifted toward the bench. They forged my signature on a deed transferring ancestral property. They altered bank records, funneled money through offshore accounts disguised as nonprofit funds. And they used my military discharge credentials to apply for federal contracts they had no legal access to. He nodded. "Did you consent to any of this, Numberg?" The evidence came in waves. A photograph of the deed with the falsified signature, a screen capture of the IP logs Kayla had tracked to Claire's home network. Audio files with my father's voice, subdued but distinct, arranging late-night deliveries to the warehouse behind my house. And then came the financial documents, bank transfers from Raven Holdings to shell corporations in Claire's name, another to Brian's Maritech Solutions. Amounts too large for helping the family. Claire sat stone still, face pale beneath her mascara. Brian leaned forward, jaw clenched, whispering urgently to his lawyer. My father didn't even blink. The defense tried. Brian's attorney objected to the admissibility of surveillance footage not obtained through legal means. Ruth stepped in with a declaration signed by our digital expert, data chain of custody. Intact, no tampering, time-stamped. Claire's lawyer tried to spin the narrative. My client acted under the impression that Naomi had relinquished claim to the house. This was a familial misunderstanding. I leaned into the microphone. A misunderstanding doesn't involve stolen credentials, falsified signatures, and use of federal infrastructure for illegal bidding. The final nail came when the prosecutor held up a physical copy of the procurement contract complete with my old clearance codes and Brian's name on the submission. He looked like he might bolt. Then the prosecutor turned to my father. "Mr. Hale, can you explain the source of the $320,000 you transferred to Maritech's silence?" He looked toward the floor, then toward Claire, then finally toward me. But I wasn't his daughter now. I was a federal witness with everything to lose and nothing left to protect. The prosecutor's voice was calm. "In your opinion, Ms. Hale, does this constitute a deliberate conspiracy?" "Yes," I said. "It wasn't just about a house. It was about power control and silencing someone they thought wouldn't come back." He nodded once, then turned to the judge. "In closing, Your Honor, the defendants did not simply defraud a veteran. They undermined the integrity of public trust, used federal systems for personal gain, and orchestrated a coordinated attempt to erase accountability. These are not family disputes. These are federal crimes." The courtroom exhaled. Somewhere behind me, pens scribbled on notepads, reporters finally allowed to witness the case. I could hear the clatter of keys, smell the ink from the printed exhibits. I felt every eye turn toward me as the judge recessed the hearing. I stood slowly, stepped down from the platform, and gathered my things. My palms were sweating. I told myself it was adrenaline, not grief. Outside, I moved through the crowd of photographers and questions ignoring the flashes. Ruth stayed close. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Not until I reached the edge of the sidewalk and saw her. My mother standing under a tree, hands clasped together like in prayer. Her mouth trembled, but no words came. Her eyes were red. She hadn't said a thing in years. Not one letter, not one call. But now she was here, and I, who had faced war zones and courts alike, found my hand trembling. Cliffhanger. Naomi stepped outside, her hand trembling, when she saw her mother standing silently, eyes red. For the first time in years, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Not to watch me fail, but to hear the truth. The federal courthouse in Alexandria had never looked so full. Rows upon rows of observers sat in tense silence, some in suits, some in uniform, and others with the faces lined by years that mirrored mine. C-SPAN cameras were discreetly tucked in corners. I could feel every lens on me as I stepped to the front. I wore my uniform not just because I had earned it, but because it was the only armor I had left. My ribbons were real. My service was real. And today, I'd let that truth speak louder than any forged deed or whispered lie. Ms. Hale, the prosecutor began. You may proceed with your full testimony for the court. I took a breath that felt like peeling off rusted chains. My name is Naomi Hale. I served over 20 years in the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Task Force. I held top-level clearance. I came home with honor, expecting only silence. Instead, I was erased. A murmur swept through the benches. My name was removed from my family's will, from their home, from their story. They forged signatures, laundered money, used my identity to access military contracts. They did it under my father's approval. They did it while calling me unstable, dangerous, irrelevant. Gasps now. The prosecutor played the audio file. Claire's voice crackled through the speakers. She's just an unemployed soldier clinging to medals that don't matter anymore. No one moved. One veteran near the back, a man in a faded navy jacket, shook his head slowly. Another seated beside him reached for her cane, jaw clenched. I turned to the judge, but I was speaking to everyone. We don't wear these uniforms for medals. We wear them because we believe in something larger than ourselves. I did not serve to return home and be treated like a threat or a burden or a lie. Someone clapped, just once, but then others joined. Not everyone. Not the ones in tailored blazers who probably golfed with people like Brian, but enough. Enough to know I wasn't alone anymore. The judge lifted his hand. Silence resumed. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Claire sat frozen. Brian's hand twitched over his tie. My father, stone-faced as always, stared past me. The judge leaned forward. Given the volume and substance of evidence submitted, this court will proceed to a full criminal trial 6 weeks from today. All motions to dismiss are denied. All current restraining orders and property freezes remain in effect. I exhaled just slightly. It wasn't over. But we were past denial, past doubt. This was real now. Court recessed. I gathered my notes, stepped down from the stand, and caught the eye of that Navy vet on the back bench. He gave me a nod. Just that. But it said everything. I turned toward the hallway. Claire was already reaching into her handbag, fingers moving rapidly across her phone. She didn't look at me, but I saw it. She opened her photo app, scrolled through pictures of family dinners, holidays, and smiling portraits from years past. She tapped one folder, then another. Claire L. Claire quietly pulled out her phone and deleted every photo of Naomi from the family's social media account. They tried to destroy every trace of me, but I had archived everything, even their crimes. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, the soft hum of my encrypted laptop filling the silence. The external drive rested beside me like a time bomb, one they'd forgotten I even owned. My fingers trembled slightly as I plugged it in, not from fear, from restraint. File directory loaded. The first folder was dated 7 years ago, labeled Legacy. Inside were scans of contracts, correspondence, grainy surveillance stills from years past. They'd once been my insurance policy. Now they were a loaded gun. Claire must have assumed she had deleted everything. She always had a knack for arrogance. But she hadn't counted on me backing up every drive I ever used. She hadn't counted on military-grade recovery software. And she sure as hell hadn't counted on me coming back with a legal team. I pinged Kayla with the file batch encrypted time-stamped. Within seconds, she responded. Got it. Matching metadata confirms creation from Claire's home IP. This is gold. Next, I called Ruth. I'm coming in, I said. And I'm not alone. I'm bringing ghosts. She didn't ask questions. Ruth never did when my voice sounded like that. At the firm's downtown office, Ruth waited in the boardroom, sleeves rolled and eyes sharp. I slid the drive across the table like a chess piece. Contracts processed through the shell vendors, I said, opening the file. All routed through Maritech and Raven Holdings. Look, this one's a falsified procurement agreement for drone parts. Same model we used to inspect in Kuwait. Ruth's brows furrowed. You're telling me they reused defense documents to mask fake orders? Not just reused, modified. Then ran payment cycles through dummy vendors using addresses that match my father's commercial listings from the 90s. They resurrected his old businesses on paper. Claire managed the routing. Brian did the laundering. My name was used to legitimize it. She opened her laptop and uploaded the files into our official court submission. I'll add these to the affidavit. The court will want a certified backup. No problem, I said, pulling out a second drive. I have 3. A notification pinged. Kayla again. FYI. Brian tried to scrub his metadata trail 2 days ago, but he didn't know we had the backup from your last OS scan. He's cooked. I forwarded the message to Ruth, who let out a dry chuckle. Claire and Brian thought deleting files would save them. They underestimated a woman trained to extract secrets from nation-states. I watched her file the documents into the federal repository. One by one, every forged receipt, every IP record, every manipulated digital signature was now admissible. But the moment that made me freeze wasn't technical. It was personal. One folder deep inside the archive, untouched, titled Hale Family Originals. My heart skipped. I clicked. Among receipts and email logs, a video loaded, grainy but clear. It was my grandfather in his study the day he signed the original will. His voice unshaken. This house goes to Naomi. She's the one who never left, not in spirit. I trust her to keep it safe. The document was visible on the desk, unaltered, signed, dated, the same one I had shown Ruth weeks ago, but now with the recorded confirmation. We both stared at the screen. That's your hammer, Ruth whispered. I nodded. Time to swing. Just then my phone buzzed. An anonymous number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the subject line. Internal email. Forwarded copy. I opened it. From undisclosed Ravenka. Net. To redacted subject, urgent message. If Naomi opens her mouth, we don't just lose assets. We lose our freedom. We need to move fast before the hearing date changes. I passed the phone to Ruth. They're panicking, she said, reading. Let them, I replied. Her phone buzzed next. She answered and listened in silence, eyes narrowing. Understood. We'll prepare accordingly. She hung up, looked me dead in the eyes. That was the federal prosecutor's office. Based on this new evidence and risk of flight, they're pushing the trial forward. I leaned back in the chair, adrenaline humming through my limbs. It was happening. The timeline was collapsing in our favor. The cliff edge we'd been dancing along had just shifted beneath their feet, and this time I wasn't the one about to fall. Ruth received word from the prosecutor's office the trial might be pushed up due to flight risk. They had their secrets, their manipulation, and each other. But I had something more dangerous, the truth under oath. Brian Hale walked out of the Raven Holdings headquarters for the last time under a swarm of flashing cameras. The press release had gone out just minutes before. Due to pending federal investigation, Brian Hale has been placed on indefinite leave, pending internal review. The company had cut him loose the second the indictment list leaked to media contacts. No one wanted their name tied to federal conspiracy. At the same time, Claire Hale was across town in a lawyer's office that smelled like old mahogany and desperation. She was alone. Her posture wasn't sharp anymore. Her voice cracked as she tried to frame her statement. I was manipulated by my husband and father, she told the assistant district attorney. I didn't know the details. I was following family orders. It was a gamble and a cheap one. But desperation makes people throw each other under the bus faster than the ink dries on a subpoena. Back at Ruth's office, I watched footage unfold on the news. Brian's stoic face surrounded by bodyguards. Claire ducking under her coat at the courthouse steps. But the one that made me pause was the image of my father. He was standing inside what used to be the family home, his hands trembling as he shouted into a phone. The video taken by a local reporter captured him slamming his fist against a glass coffee table, shattering it into jagged pieces. The clip played over and over. Family patriarch loses composure amid scandal, the Chiron read. Public narratives, turning, Ruth said, not looking up from the stack of documents. I know, I murmured. They're unraveling faster than I expected. My phone buzzed. A courier message. I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter. The stationery was delicate, slightly yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was careful and old-fashioned. Naomi, I've watched from the sidelines far too long. Your mother and I were close once. I knew about the house. I knew your name was on the will. I also knew she let them change it. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Margaret Lewis. Margaret had been a friend of my mother's, one of those women who hosted brunches who always asked how I was doing, but never really listened. And yet now, here she was reaching across years of silence to say I knew. And I stayed quiet. And I regret it. I folded the letter slowly. Truth has a strange way of surfacing, I said, placing it beside the growing pile of evidence. That evening, the federal courthouse held another closed session. This time, the judge was ready. The court finds sufficient cause to freeze the financial assets of Claire Hale, Brian Hale, and Henry Hale, she announced. Effective immediately, these accounts will be placed under investigative seal and subject to audit. The moment was sterile, procedural, and devastating. Everything they had built by fraud was now under scrutiny. Their liquidity evaporated in minutes. Homes, cars, stocks, college funds gone. The empire built on my silence was collapsing brick by forged brick. I stood outside the courthouse steps as the wind picked up. The sky was bruised with the color of approaching night. Reporters crowded near the gates. Some called my name, but I ignored them. Then my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. Naomi came, the voice shaky, unsure, familiar. My mother. She said nothing else, just my name. And in that brief silence, I could hear everything she didn't say. Regret, fear, maybe even guilt. I held the phone to my ear and didn't speak. Let her sit in it. Let her feel for the first time what it was like to be alone on the other end. Naomi received a phone call from her mother. He begged me outside the courtroom. Please, Naomi, don't ruin us. I looked him in the eyes and said, you did that on your own. It was late afternoon, the light stretching long shadows across the courthouse steps. I'd just finished reviewing the final briefing with Ruth when I saw him standing near the marble column by the hallway. Not in a suit, but in his old wool coat. His tie was crooked. His face was pale. He looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't slow my steps until I was nearly past him, but then he spoke low and hoarse. Naomi. I turned. Mr. Hale, I said flatly. His face crumpled at the title. Don't do that. I'm your father. You lost the right to that word the day you erased me from everything I said. He stepped closer. I didn't know it would go this far. You didn't care, I corrected. That's what you mean. I made mistakes. He said, hands open, pleading. We were trying to protect the family by forging documents, stealing my house, laundering money through a company that used my clearance. That's protection. He looked away, jaw tight. I was scared. No, you were proud, I said. You couldn't stand that your daughter came back in uniform instead of a dress, holding medals instead of wedding invitations. His eyes flickered. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What wasn't fair was you not coming to my retirement ceremony. Remember that when I called and invited you, he stayed silent. You said, and I quote, that's not something to brag about. It's just a job. 25 years of service and you reduced it to nothing. He swallowed hard. Claire was going through a rough time then. Claire was always going through something, I said, bitterness creeping in. And you always had time for her, for Brian. But never for me. He didn't argue. Instead, he lowered his voice. You've already humiliated us. The indictments, the hearings, the news coverage. Please, Naomi, don't let it go further. I laughed short and sharp. You think this is about humiliation? It'll destroy our name, he whispered. Our name, I echoed. You erased my name. From the will, from the family records, from everything. I panicked, he said. I let Claire talk me into things. You signed. You knew. He didn't answer. After a moment, he reached out his hand, trembling as it hovered near mine. I know I failed, but I'm still your father. I stared at that hand. For a second, I saw the man who once held mine on the walk to school, who once helped fix my bike chain. But then I remembered the empty seat at my officer commissioning, the silence after my deployments, the house I came home to only to be thrown out like a stranger. I didn't take his hand. Behind him, I saw her, my mother. Standing near the edge of the colonnade, she hadn't approached. but she watched. Her arms were folded tight across her chest. Her eyes rimmed red. "I don't hate you," I told him. "However, I cannot grant you forgiveness in the name of justice." He recoiled slightly. "And justice," I declared, "is on its way regardless of whether you seek mercy or not." He averted his gaze, then shoulders slumped. I moved forward, my gaze fixed ahead, not daring to glance back. As I descended the final step, a presence lingered next to me. My mom. She avoided my gaze, yet her voice shattered the stillness. If only I had chosen differently, perhaps this pain wouldn't be so deep. I gazed at her for a lingering moment, and so she continued on her path. My mother leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "If only I had made another choice, perhaps you wouldn't be feeling this pain." They stripped away all that I had, yet I emerged from that courtroom with my name, my dignity, and a sense of justice firmly in my grasp. The silence in the courtroom was more profound than I had anticipated. After all the weeks filled with hearings, motions, and cross-examinations today carried a sense of stillness, a feeling of finality. Everything unfolded quietly without any outbursts or theatrics. Only the gavel, the steady voice of the judge, and the profound impact of decisions being etched into the fabric of time. I settled next to Ruth, our shoulders almost brushing against each other. Across the aisle sat Claire Bryan and my father, arranged in a row, reminiscent of a scene I never thought I would witness. Claire's face was ashen, her jaw set tight. Bryan's eyes darted anxiously from one corner to another. My father appeared aged, not due to age, but rather from the gradual wearing away, the gradual disintegration of pride in the face of reality. The judge's voice resonated as Claire Hale faced six years in federal custody. Brian Caldwell received 8 years, and Edward Hale was sentenced to 10 years without the possibility of parole. A sudden gasp echoed in the courtroom, a wave of tension sweeping over the gathered crowd, and then there was silence once more. No applause. No applause is needed. I refrained from smiling. I simply nodded to Ruth, who then closed her folder and softly placed her hand over mine. It didn't feel like a triumph, I thought. It was the end of a journey. Amidst the throng of reporters, my gaze was immediately drawn to the veterans, individuals in the weathered uniforms, some supported by canes or seated in wheelchairs, while others display ribbons affixed to their tattered jackets with a sense of pride. A man with a prosthetic leg and gentle, unwavering eyes took a step forward, reaching out his hand in a gesture of connection. "Colonel Hale," he remarked. I gave it a good shake. "We haven't been overlooked," I assured him. He gave a slight nod. "Not as long as individuals like you remain in the picture." Bright bursts from the cameras flickered at the edges of my sight. A reporter called out, "Do you feel animosity towards them now?" After everything that had transpired, I paused to gaze up at the sky for a brief moment. The sun had finally pierced the veil of morning fog. A gentle warmth caressed my face. "I don't hold on to hate," I said. "I embrace understanding." I descended the steps with a deliberate slowness, each movement filled with a sense of contemplation. Ruth is here with me. Isaac stood by the car, anticipation in the air, while Kayla offered a thumbs up from across the lot, a silent signal of reassurance. They shared a bond that transcended mere friendship. They were the family I selected for myself. I chose not to go back to the house. It had lost its significance for me. What I desired was never about mere structures or materials. It was my rightful place to be part of my own narrative. Weeks later, I found myself in the Defense Service Library, gazing at the wall of dedication. The surface was a deep, shadowy granite, intricately carved with the names of individuals who had made remarkable contributions to the safety of the nation. I had strolled by it once as a young cadet, murmuring vows softly to myself. In those days, it seemed like a tribute for everyone else, unreachable. But now, it had arrived. Colonel Naomi Hale, Cyber Command, OIA 2000-2023, embodies valor, service, and integrity. No family portrait has ever held such significance. No legacy has ever matched this one. As I stood there, my reflection hazy, in the gleaming stone, I felt the sting of tears in my eyes. Yet tears did not fall. I stood strong. In the library of the Defense Service, my name was inscribed on the wall of dedication. I stood before it, my eyes glistening yet composed. They took away her identity, her sanctuary, and her self-respect, convinced that no one would ever trust the story of a so-called shattered warrior. Ultimately, it was the fabrications that fell apart when confronted with the truth of her testimony that remained steadfast. Justice unfolds not in the clamor of retribution, but in the steadfast bravery of an individual who will not be silenced. When faced with injustice, steadfast bravery can resonate for a lifetime, shaping destinies and altering paths. Some conflicts unfold quietly within the confines of courtrooms and in the souls of those who have felt the sting of betrayal. Often, it is the most unassuming fighter who emerges victorious in the most profound way. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share, like, and comment below. Please respond with 1, if this story touched you, or 2, if you believe it could have concluded in another way.